Hi, painting. I just wanted to introduce your very last assignment for painting one, and it does relate to the curriculum. And so I wanted to give you an overview of it. It is going to be a summative assignment. We have had only really two summative assignments, and we need to have more before we can call the class done. So I just want to make sure that you knew that. And then also keep in mind that the exercise that we're going to be doing, the painting we're going to be doing, is going to take you several hours to complete. We will break it up into several days, but if you wanted to sit on one day and just kind of do the whole thing, you could. You would just need to still take some process shots to prove that you personally made the painting. Um, and that way, also, if you have problems, then you could stop and then you could ask questions through Canvas and putting your slides up and contacting me. So let's go ahead and get started. I think the preview kind of gives you a little idea of what we're going to be doing. So, what you're going to do is you're going to select a person who lives in your household that you can draw and then paint. It can be a self portrait. I actually painted myself. If you took photos for the oil painting that we never got to, that in your face portrait, you can use those photos as well. And I gave you some suggestions of things that you could do, themes that you could think about when you're thinking of what you want those portraits to do. You could maybe play on the concept of inside out, basically how you feel on the inside, but how maybe you portray yourself on the outside. You could play with exaggerated features, or you could do some sort of blank expression. That's probably for those who still need a lot of practice just doing basic proportions. And so here's some different artist examples that I found online that give you some ideas. Some of these are very realistic in color and detail, and others of them are a little bit more expressionistic. And so you're going to get to choose the style that you want to. Do you want to paint more realistic? Do you want to do more blotchy? It's up to you. We're just going to make sure that it has realistic proportions and details. So this is not the time to cartoon or do manga or do some sort of animation. We want to make sure that it looks like a real person. We're not going to oversimplify the details. So, what you're going to do is break this assignment up into various days. So, first, you're going to pick your model, and then you're going to take at least 4 photo references. Now, you can take many more, and you can see from my example that I did a lot of did a lot of different photos. And so you want to make sure that you experiment. I really focused on my eyes and my nose because I found that those were kind of like the most expressive parts of my face. And I did frontal view. You don't have to do a frontal view, but once again, for beginners, that's probably the best place to start. And then you're going to crop your photos and focus on at least 2 features that are near each other. That's going to focus on proportion, like the spacing in between your eyes, the spacing between an eye and a nose, like how you're going to create realism through those relationships between distance of those things. So I gave you ideas of things that you can put together. You could do your 2 eyes like I did, my eyes, and I have a part of my nose in mine as well. You can always do more than 2 features. So you could do your 2 eyes, your eyes and your nose and mouth, mouth and chin, ear and eye and nose. Remember all those things I just rattled off are actually listed right here for you, and you will always have access to this presentation in your PowerPoint or in your slide on your agenda, right? So you can kind of go in and crop. Some of these I didn't crop so close to my eyes. It's just the way that this formatted on this website, right? So I really focused on my nose and my eyes, and my mouth. And then I want you to select your favorite expression. So my favorite was kind of this big eye, happy eye, smiling eyes that I have here, right? So then you're going to select your board. You have to figure out what you have left. You were all given 3 pieces of watercolor board. So right here that I'm pointing at, we have the big piece, the middle, piece and the small piece. I used, I think, the middle piece, which was 8 by 10. So these are going to be super tiny. You do not have to paint enormous. You can even paint realistic or life size if you want to. Also, if you didn't use it for the breakfast pages, you might already have your watercolor paper done as well. If you use either of these two large pieces, feel free to draw a border and make it smaller. You don't have to use the whole piece. If you want to and you have time, feel free. If you have time to make more than just one, feel free. It's entirely up to you. So, once again, we will break this down into parts so don't feel like you're doing this all in one day. After you've picked your favorite photos, you're going to start to draw them out on your board. So, from the review of proportions, you remember that your face is 5 eyes wide. So what I did is made little tick marks for how big I wanted to make my eyes, and I did that same spacing in between. You can see this one on the left is a little bit bigger, and you'll see I fixed that a little bit later in here. So I drew my eyes, and notice that my eyes are not footballs. They have different concave and convex lines. My eyes aren't even really symmetrical. If you go back looking at my reference, you'll notice that. So we'll go back here. They're not exactly the same. There's even a tilt to my head. So just keep that in mind that it might not exactly be perfect. And always looking at my reference photo when I'm trying to draw or paint realistically. And I just used a number 2 pencil. I tried to use a pencil that I knew most of you would have. And when I went to draw them out, I felt like it was really heavy. And so if you have an eraser, you might want to lighten your lines up. I used a kneaded eraser that I had at home. If you don't have a kneaded eraser, you can just use a normal eraser to lighten up the lines so that they're less obvious. But in all of these sections, I did a step by step. Now, obviously, if you drew a nose or a mouth, it would be a little bit different. But a lot of these tips are very similar. I'm going to attach some tutorial videos at the very bottom for how to draw noses and mouths and eyes for you as well. And so you can use those if you need extra help on those. Um, if you want to draw life size, you could do an actual measurement of your eyes. So if you want to draw your eyes or your nose or your mouth the same size they are on your face, feel free to actually measure them. So you can use a ruler to figure out that your eye is like smaller than an inch. And then keep in mind those proportions of the face where everything lines up, right? So there's that space in between the eye that's an eye width, your nose lines up with the inner corner, your mouth lines up with the middle of your eye, your ear lines up with your eyebrow and the bottom of your nose, right? So keep those things in mind when you're drawing out your features. They should be in proportion. We don't want our eyes too close or too far apart. Okay, so when you're done drawing, you need to decide what colors you want to use. You can either do something more realistic, like the example on the left, or more expressive, like you see on the right. I tested out my colors on extra paper. I used the bottom of my watercolor sample. And so I used a lot of orange and blues to kind of figure out different skin tones. I had to use a lot of water. There's no white in watercolor. So I had to use a lot of water to make it super, super light. I also made some brownish bluish colors with burnt umber or raw sienna if you have darker skin tones. You have some browns in your set. I found some pinky colors for around my eye. I added some purple to my shadow to make it super, super dark. Also, I noticed I could see a little bit of this veins and bluish color under my eyes, so that's why I chose that. And then for my pupil, the inner part of my eye, I used Payne's Gray. It looks like a black. And then I used all three of my primary colors. So my blue, my red, my yellow, I mixed it up together to make a dark, dark blackish color since there's no black in your set. So you want to probably test out your colors before you put them on your canvas. That doesn't mean you have to mix every last one of them before you begin, but you at least want to mix the ones that you're using currently. Here's a sample that I found online of someone who did kind of a quick sketch of color just to test it out before they began, right? So when you are painting, you want to make sure that you start with the things that are the farthest first. So for me, I actually started with my eyeball because my eyelid covers it. I included a diagram of the parts of the eye if you don't know all of the vocabulary. Um, this is eyebrow, got cropped off. This is the whites of the eye that got cropped off too. Right? So I start with my eyeball, and if you notice, the corners of my eye are a little bit darker because they're in shadow. Sometimes your eyelid will also create a little bit of shadow here too. So make sure that you're conscious of that in your photos as well. You can see that a little bit in this one. So what I did is I put some bluish gray in the corners, really, really light, because it's not a dark shadow. And then I laid in the lightest color of my iris, which is the colored section of my eye. I kind of have golden brown eyes. And I went in there with my little brush and added a little bit of texture. You want to start really slowly. You don't want to add too much color right away. Looking at our reference sheets, if you go too dark right away, you can always blot it with a little bit of water. But you can see here, I just kind of gradually started layering from the lightest color to the darkest color. Also, my eyelid, right? And the eyelid of this person here is kind of pinkish. So notice I'm not using the same color for my eyelid color. I added some of that pinkish red around there as well. And then I add a little bit of blue to the outer edge of my eye because my eye kind of has some green. I have hazel eyes, so it's kind of have this bluish greenish color on the outer edges. Once again, there's step-by-step directions here for you. Then I wanted to let my eyes dry. It's going to bleed. So if you are done for the day, stop there. If you still want to go, you can always mix colors for your next part. So I started with my skin next, and I laid out my lightest value of skin, and I brushed it into my entire section. Now for my image, I didn't include the side of my head or the bottom of my nose, so I kind of just made it blotchy, and I used a little bit of the paper towel so that there was a gradual transition on the edge rather than it looking really choppy and crisp. So I laid in the lightest value, and then I started layering my midtones on top of each other. So you always lay in the darker value on top of the next really lightly. Notice how I left some really light values there as I went. You can let it dry as you go. And then I went in and added my shadows. So I added my darkest values in, right, with my skin tone. And I started to add some lines and crevices to my eyes as well. So my eyelid, that's in there with kind of like the pupil color, which was that Payne's gray and then the primaries together. I used a blue violet or a violet color for my shadow, right? And you can see how that really gave me definition from where I started here to here. Okay, so this is all of the value before eyelashes because the eyelashes are going to cover up some of this. And so I'm going to wait until that's entirely done, right? So for my eyelashes, I made a really dark violet with some violet and yellow. Maybe I even threw some Payne's gray in there as well. I also included a tutorial at the very bottom of this for you guys. And you'll see that I started by lining where my eyelashes are going to go. So I used my tiny, tiny little brush and lined it. And then I had put in very few eyelashes focusing on where they're going. Notice how they're not going out straight. They're going out with gentle curves and they change directions. Then I thickened them at the edge and I added a few little thinner ones at the bottom. So there's not actually very many. Then when I went to do my bottom lashes, there's even fewer of them. And so I have to really focus. I started with very light color at first. And then once I was happy, I went in and darkened them a little bit. So you can see that here as well. I lightened it and then I went back over it a little bit darker. When it comes to eyelashes, less is more. You don't want to have so many. right? Same thing with eyebrows, if you're going to include your eyebrows. For me, I only added a little bit of darkness for my eyebrows because I had some fun with texture and it disappeared anyway. But once again, directions are right here and tutorials are at the bottom. So you might say, that looks good. That's done. I'm not going to mess with it. If that's the case, feel free. But if you want to be a little bit more experimental, like some of this artwork by these artists, then you're going to have to look around your house and figure out what you can do to make it be more experimental. So think about how they made these effects, right? So I went around my house and I thought about how I could do this. For this one, they dropped some color down and maybe they used straws to blow it. So maybe coffee creamer stir sticks or little itty bitty like cocktail straws. They used really tiny ones to blow on. This one, they put blotches of color down wet on wet, and then they tipped the canvas or the watercolor board so that it dripped down. Same thing with this one, just smaller pools. And then this one is very blotchy, so it's wet on wet, and then there's a little bit of spray. So maybe they used an old toothbrush. So I had an old toothbrush, a straw. This is something for kids. It squirts marker pigment, so maybe you have some fun like things from your childhood that might work as well. And so what I did is I added some wet blotches of color for my eyebrows and for my shadows, and I let them drip. And then once I had some of those blotches, I used the straw and I used the sprayer to spray the color out to the edges. Since I looked kind of happy and surprised, I wanted that energy to kind of radiate out from my eye. I added some more violet and I added some more yellow to that as well. It really isn't yellow, it's more like the orangey color that I used for my face. But that's my finished product. So that's going to be the end of our semester. So I want you to make sure that you do a really good job. If you run out of paper or run out of board, feel free to use like sketchbook paper and to contact me if you have any issues.